Good morning. Thank you for the walk-up music. I'm not used to that. It's a great touch. My name is Tom Suter. I'm the founder and CEO of the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and we've got two real experts for you today. To my far left, we have Wendy Whitmore, who's Senior Vice President of the mysterious-sounding Unit 42 at Palo Alto Networks. And then to my immediate left, we have Emily Mossberg, who's a global cyber leader at Deloitte. And I think we'll get right into the conversation, and maybe we can start off with you, Wendy. How would you describe the current public sector threat landscape today? What's the state of play?
Yeah, well, first, good morning. Thank you for joining us today. I think the thing about the public sector is that they face every threat that we see across the totality of industries, right? So when we look at nation state actors, certainly the public sector is a prime target for them. When we look at cyber criminal activity as well, you see state and local municipalities in particular getting hit by ransomware attackers on a nearly weekly basis. So I think going back to the nation state activity, we in the forefront of the news is the situation going on with Russia and Ukraine, and there's a huge cyber undercurrent, if you will, that I think is bubbled really pretty closely to the top. But behind the scenes of that, what's going on are other nation state actors who are really leveraging being in the shadows, if you will, to be able to make a lot more forward momentum. And so we're seeing the Chinese nation state actors, a wide variety of them that we track at Unit 42, essentially continuing to proliferate into going further and deeper into networks throughout the world. So not only in Eastern Europe, which you might anticipate given the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but when you look at Belt and Road initiatives throughout Africa, throughout South America, seeing them continue to get very involved in that. And then combining the two, if you will, are nation state actors who are actually getting involved in cyber criminal activity as well. So for example, North Korea, who is pretty systematically getting involved in ransomware attacks, looking to make some forward progress given the economic sanctions that they're facing. So the reality is the public sector, I think, has to be prepared to detect and defend against all of those types of attacks.
Great, and as a follow-up, Emily, we've had a lot of things happen lately. We've had the Ukraine war, we've had this COVID phenomenon, where I think the attackers took about a week off and then kind of evolved from there. How have the cyber attacks evolved over time, and what are the emerging threats that the public sector organizations should be aware of?
So I'm gonna take a second and take a pretty far step back, because I think that it's important as we think about this space to think about how it's evolved, not only in the last 5 years, but the last 15 years, the last 25 years. And I think that, to Wendy's point about the fact that government and public sector touches everything, we've seen a huge evolution in terms of what everything means. And 25 years ago, there were what I would call the high side that had probably a greater understanding of what was going on and what the threat might look like as it relates to cyber. But then there was the rest of the world, and that includes a lot of the low side government, and it includes a lot of the enterprises. And 25 years ago, the conversation was, is this really a threat? Is this something, what do I have? What assets do I have that really anyone would want to come after? But what we've seen over time is that there is a truth to the fact that yes, what you have, organization, whether it be personally identifiable information or financial data, or whether it be critical infrastructure that's keeping a city or a town alive, yes, you have what we need. And so now I think what we're starting to see is a broader targeting across not just the specific high side of the government, but across municipalities. And we're also seeing a need for more public-private partnerships. And that's happening, I think, not only across public sector and private sector. I think it's happening within the government as well, in terms of how much can we share across all of the agencies? How can we bring more of the agencies to the same level of understanding of what the threat looks like? And then how can we share that out with the private enterprises? And from my global perspective, there's even more conversation about what can we share beyond the borders of the United States? And how do we decide what we share with our allies? how much information is the right amount of information, and ultimately, what is it that we want to get back from them from a sharing perspective? And the reality is, in many cases, the systematic cyber approaches in the US are ahead of many of the other countries out there. And so we have to help them in setting the bar, not just for the protection of them, but for the protection of all of us. So I think that things are continuing to get complex. The threat actors are out there and are very focused on understanding how to get and gain access to the information that they want. And we've got to continue to come together and collaborate in order for us to understand what it is that they're after and how to best protect ourselves.
No, I think you're right about that collaboration. We've seen it with CISA, we've seen it with the State Department, we've seen it with the Executive Office of the President, and just agencies have we're all together on this. So I think we've seen a lot of collaboration, and that's really why I started ATARC, is to facilitate that. Who in the audience has played with ChatGPT? There we go, there we go. So ChatGPT has many applications. GPT in general, we've been doing a lot at ATARC on artificial intelligence. I'd like to know, Wendy, maybe we can go with you on this. How has the advance of emerging technologies like AI been in the driving the future of cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that, in terms of the generative AI movement and the recent, implementation of it over the recent months, is a watershed moment, right? This is game-changing for all of us. On a technology side, many of us, certainly including Palo Alto, we've been, I'm sure at Deloitte, right? We've had AI and machine learning embedded in technologies and tooling for, in many, many years at this point, right? But I think when we look at it from the attacker lens, what I'm most concerned about in the immediate future is what I think is going to be a much lower barrier to entry and an absolute acceleration of the human side of these attacks. So the social engineering pieces, how cyber criminals in particular, who may, at least previously, have had lower budgets relative, excuse me, to a nation state actor, may have had lower budgets to conduct some of those pieces of the attack. That's no longer a barrier to entry for them, and they all of a sudden went from a baseline of here to an acceleration. That means the language barriers don't exist, the grammar, being able to understand, if Emily were my target, for example, what's the tone of voice she uses in emails? I can now emulate that incredibly successfully, and so I think we're gonna see a lot of elements of that related to those attacks. Today, our team does a number of investigations into breach response. We're not seeing right now AI or ChatGPT or generative AI generated attacks. We're not responding to those yet. I certainly think that's going to be, the next step. Our teams are specifically focused on, understanding how those attacks would be generated, and we're actually conducting our own research to wage those attacks against our own technology, so we can see how it consistently responds as these attacks are going to evolve. But to me, I think the real game changer is just that immediate impact to the human lens of these attacks.
Do you mind,
Yeah, sure.
Wendy,
Yep.
Tom, if I add one other lens to it that we're thinking about? And it's less about the immediate cyber implications. It's more about the business implications and the change to the enterprise. What we're seeing, or what we expect to see, is probably a better way to put it, is that this is going to allow us to make, as a society, greater changes to our businesses more rapidly. And I think we all know that as those changes happen, so does the threat landscape, so does the attack surface, so do the threats that we need to be thinking about. So we're thinking about not only how is this going to impact immediate threats, but how is this going to allow us to continue to move even faster in terms of business acceleration, and how are we going to be positioned to face off against this? And I really do think it is going to be a watershed moment. I think that we're not quite at the precipice of, it going into the wild, but I think that in 3 years we probably will be, and then it's going to move very fast. And so I view these next 3 years as planning time for all of us.
I'm just going to add a little question based on what you all said. How how are the humans supposed to interact with this new technology? What kind of training, what kind of challenges are there going to be for the federal government and private industry? Really the role of the human in relation to the new technology that's being developed. And Wendy, maybe we'll start off with you.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure you have some interesting insights from Deloitte, but we're running into those challenges just within Palo Alto, right? Is what are the rules and regulations we have for our employees to be able to use the technology? What's our platform approach to it, and what are we going to allow from that perspective? And so for us, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to learn as much as possible, as quickly as we can. So we certainly, as an organization, are encouraging our workforce to do that. We have a wide variety of projects in every different product technology group. Certainly in Unit 42, we're looking, to Emily's point, is how can we enable, leverage generative AI to enable our workforce to move even faster, right? So there today are still some pretty manual tasks when it comes to conducting investigations, to an initial intake of, and a triage of a situation, and understanding what data do we have and what does that data point us to as part of the initial steps. And so I think on the positive lens, there are a whole lot of mechanisms that are going to be able to enable us to move faster and to help with the massive job shortage, right, of skills, I should say skills shortage relative to available jobs. I think that's going to help us close the gap there in a positive way.
I might add on the point that you made, the guardrails, right? I feel like this is one of those technologies that we really have to understand what the capabilities are and how far we're willing to let the technology go without human interaction. And so that's when I say that we need to spend the next 3 years planning. To me, it's figuring out where those guardrails are, figuring out how we can even implement them. Because to some degree, when you unleash a technology that has an ability to perpetuate itself, where's the stop button? How do you put in place the right guardrail? And I think that that's really what we, as a group of technologists and as a group of cyber leaders and cyber strategists, need to be thinking about, is how are we going to proactively understand how far is far enough and where we need to have human interaction.
Wow, this is turning into a philosophical discussion. It's fantastic. Emily, I have a question for you. How can public sector organizations ensure their cybersecurity strategies align with broader organizational goals and objectives? We've seen the Cybersecurity Executive Order, IT modernization, the CXO, all these priorities are flying in from the administration. How do I align my cybersecurity priorities?
I think we hear more and more about mission cyber. And, in some instances, I think there's, it's a bit of a buzzword, but I think the reality is there is some realness to what mission cyber means. And as we, as citizens and as organizations and as the public sector become more dependent on technology and use it in greater ways in order to further our missions, we have to understand what the cyber risks are associated with that technology, and we also need to use the cyber capabilities in order for us to enable the mission, right? And so I think that to some degree, it's one, about understanding the breadth of the stakeholders that you need to be thinking about today. When we work with our clients, it's no more, okay, well, we've got the CISO and we've got the CIO and we have some of the senior leaders from IT involved in the conversation. It's, do we have the person responsible for the mission involved in the conversation? What is it that they're trying to accomplish? How can cyber be either a benefit to that or a risk to that over time? So I really think that there's a core component to understanding the breadth of the stakeholders and having those conversations early as opposed to later. I'm gonna tell a bit of a story. It's an old story, but I think it's still relevant, where had a conversation with an organization that created autonomous vehicle components. And the conversation was around the liability and some of the risk associated with those components, particularly from a cyber perspective. And the people that were involved, that were much more the risk managers than those driving the business, said, I wish someone would have had this conversation with me a year ago when we were contemplating the fact that we were gonna build this. Not because we shouldn't have built it, but because I feel like I could have given much better advice then as we were designing than I can give now. And I think that that's something that's stuck with me, and I think it's something that has to be at the forefront as we think about how we deal with the risks going forward.
Great. My next question involves, and we've been talking about this for 20 years at least, IoT security. And I think with the proliferation of 5G coming up, there's going to be more of a challenge as more devices connect to the internet. But how has the advance of technology, the proliferation of devices, impacted how public sector leaders approach cybersecurity? And what are some of the challenges they face in implementing effective cybersecurity strategies? And maybe Wendy, we'll start off with you on that question.
Yeah, great question, Tom. So, I think the reality is when we look at advancing technology, in general, it favors the offense more so than the defense, right? At least initially. So in this case, that means the attackers or people who have incentive to commit a crime, leveraging technology, are likely going to be continually pushing the envelope, right? And so from the defense perspective, the challenges we see related to that, certainly no different in the federal government as well as state and local, is that you have a wide variety of technologies that your responders are typically leveraging to conduct their jobs. And so as much as possible, we like to have responders and defenders have as much visibility as possible. That becomes a challenge, especially when you look at the state and local levels where you have such a wide variety of different organizations that are all coming into potentially one municipality. It's not necessarily easier on the federal side though, or in the in the defense sector, because you again have a wide variety of technologies. So what we are really seeing be able to accelerate the timeframes of detection are having the ability to leverage a platform, certainly that have different technologies going into a single pane of glass, and then automating as many of these processes as possible so that you can save the more challenging, the more sophisticated human tasks or analytical tasks, I should say, for the humans that you've got on your team, which are likely probably your most precious resource from a limitation perspective.
Great. Emily?
I think that one of the things that is really key is simplicity. And as Wendy said, bringing all of the information together, whether it be from an IT perspective or an OT perspective, to get a full picture. And I think, pardon me, I think we really have to continue to drive to simplicity. I've seen the pendulum in terms of more data is better to less data is better, and I think we're back, especially with AI, to more data is better. And what we really need to figure out, though, is how do we drive out the true information in all of that data? And I think moving to a simplification of platforms and being able to bring everything together is critical, particularly as we see more proliferation of different types of devices and different types of platforms. We really have to be able to bring that together to know truly what the attack surface looks like and what the threat actors are doing.
Great, great. I want to do a little shout out. A friend of mine, Johnny Overcast, works over at Palo Alto. He's really looking at this issue. Johnny, are you in the room? Can you stand up? 5G security? Johnny? Johnny's been working in this field for a lot. I would definitely use him as a resource, and we've been working with him at ATARC on this issue. Next question is, I'm a cybersecurity leader in an agency trying to do a really good job. What guidance do you have for cybersecurity leaders looking to better understand how to measure the effectiveness of their cybersecurity matters? If you can't measure it, you can't manage it, right? Maybe we'll start off with you, Wendy.
I think it relates back to the last question, just in terms of visibility. So whether you're a technical responder at the defender level or you're a senior executive responsible for oversight for an entire program, it's having visibility into the metrics and the actions that matter. So everything from the organization's ability to detect, to me too, I would say all the way to the top, which is building a culture of empowerment and one that really demonstrates that security is part of our primary mission. So I'm sure, just like Emily, we spend a lot of time talking to senior executives, a lot of times to board levels, board of directors and their teams. And one of the areas that we really emphasize is that everyone in this room who has a mission related to security and defense, you live and breathe this every day. I don't need to tell you how important it is, but some of your colleagues, maybe in finance, in marketing, in operations, they don't have the opportunity today to live and breathe this mission in the same way that we do. And so at an executive level, really creating that culture where the belief is that, hey, this is everyone's job, right? Emily and I are in this together, Tom and I are in this together. That's how it works, and we all have a role to play. And the more effectively that you can prepare proactively to ensure that, hey, my leaders know what their roles and responsibilities are during an attack. My employees know what to do if they see a message pop up on screen that says, my system's been taken over by a ransomware actor. They know who to talk to and who not to talk to, which in some cases is even more important. So all of that relates to having a really prepared, proactive defense in advance of an attack. And that's certainly an area that we specialize in, but I think really gets back to the heart of your question, right? How can we effectively defend against this? Well, we got to be able to detect it quickly, and then people need to know what their responsible actions are.
Great. Emily?
A couple points I would add. One is consistency, and that sounds really simple, but I've worked with a number of leaders who say, I'm really challenged. Every time I am asked to come in and talk about how we're doing from a cyber posture perspective, I can't seem to get people to understand where we're making progress or how we're making progress, if the money that we're spending is actually helping or not helping. And you take a step back and you say, okay, great, show me some of the reports that you've shared. And 9 times out of 10, the reports are highly varied over a period of 6 to 9 months. And I think, the reality is our leaders need and want consistency. So if we can start to have some level of consistency of how we're talking about things month over month, you start to see the light go on a little bit more in terms of, oh yes, okay. It's very hard because this is in the media, right? There's conversations about, oh, well, what about, this? What about AI? What about this threat? What about this 0 day? And so people feel like they need to react to that, and so therefore they start reporting on these latest and greatest things that they've heard in the media. But the reality is the consistency is really what's driving the understanding at the executive level. The other just small point that I would make is speak the language that the people that you're talking to speak. And Wendy, you talked a lot about, the marketing doesn't understand and live this every day, or the business doesn't live this every day. They also don't understand a lot of the words that we use around the threat and around the vulnerabilities and around, defending this and 0 day that. And so the more that we can speak the language of those that we're talking to and really try to bring it into terms related to operational excellence or even revenue or even spend or all of those kinds of things, you start to change the conversation. They start to get a better sense of what it is that you're actually trying to communicate to them.
So we're closer to the end and the beginning. Any final thoughts that we don't want to leave on the cutting room floor? Maybe start off with you, Wendy.
So I'm going to not steal, but maybe foot stomp an idea that Emily mentioned earlier, which is just the importance of public and private sector partnerships. I don't think it's ever been more important. I do think, however, we've made a lot of progress, specifically in the last year. It's certainly looking a couple years back, starting with SolarWinds and then Microsoft Exchange attacks, but now going into Russia and Ukraine. Governments and intelligence agencies, law enforcement, certs located abroad are really sharing more information than we've ever seen before. I think you see organizations like CISA who are using common publicly available technologies really well, right? So when the Log4j attacks came out, or vulnerabilities and exploits at least, they very rapidly leveraged Slack channels and Twitter and GitHub to share information broadly. And so those efforts, I think, are making great strides. That's certainly something that we're very passionate about, but my team in particular, we work a lot with law enforcement and intelligence agencies to facilitate that information sharing, and are actually really seeing some true efforts where we're able to stop attacks in progress, to make attackers less successful, and actually, in some cases, put people in jail for criminal activity. And so the more of that we can continue to facilitate and work as a team together across these agencies and organizations, the better we're going to be.
Well, thank you, Wendy and Emily. I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for your attention.